Hello there, John Corderillo here, the counsellor of your listener. Thank you for joining me for this episode. Today I'm going to be providing a brief primer on data protection. That is to say, how to best store your digital files with which we deal on a regular basis, given that we are living in a digital society, and how to best keep them safe. Now, I'm not an information technology expert, I'm not a cybersecurity expert. I would not be using this content as the final advice on how to best store and protect your data, especially when security is an issue. What I am going to be talking about today is just how fragile digital data can be and the minimum efforts that we should be taking to protect our data, because our data is incredibly important to us and many people lose it as a result of not properly protecting their data. So today I'm going to be showing you basic samples about how data protection can be done, but when deciding for yourself, it's always best to consult with an expert on this topic. First, let's talk about your computer or your phone or the device on which you actually manipulate your data. We need to clarify that your computer is not for storing data. This may seem counterintuitive, but even though it has a drive inside it, a hard disk spindle drive or a solid state drive, its primary purpose is to manipulate data and create data, creating files and so on. A lot of people have their computers packed full of files to which they don't need regular access, and they think that their computer is designed to store data. In reality, the drive inside your computer is for storing the files to which you need regular access. The files which you do not need to access regularly, which are for archival purposes, should be stored on external storage devices, and I'm going to refer to them in just a minute. Now, in reality, the drive inside your computer, or any drive for that matter, can fail at any stage, at any age, without warning, and sometimes that failure can be complete. It's not always, but it can be complete. If that occurs to you, there's a significant chance that your data will not be retrievable. Most storage devices are incredibly unpredictable that way, and the responsibility is on you to take steps to protect your data. The first step is in the temporary backup that you have. Now, as you're working on files on your computer throughout the day, you should have a temporary backup system ideally that allows for copies of the files on which you're working to be stored on an external device. Now, at the very least, this should involve having a separate drive, a hard drive or a solid state drive, to which you regularly manual copy files from your computer to the drive. And if you want to, for convenience, you may want to keep it connected to the computer so that you can more conveniently copy it. But there's a second possibility that if the computer was to malfunction while you're working on the data, it could also corrupt the data on the drive. So for that reason, you may also want to have a second drive which you regularly connect to the computer, copy the progress of your work, and then disconnect safely, which I'll discuss shortly as well, so that if the computer fails and it corrupts what's on the drive that's connected to it, it doesn't immediately affect what's stored on that other drive. An alternative solution is to use a cloud storage system or a service that synchronizes the files on your computer to an external server to do this automatically and in real time. That comes with its caveats, and I'm going to be describing them in just a minute. That's your short-term backup. Now, what we also need is medium and long-term data storage and backup. At least once a day, you should be manually creating backups of your files, which you've modified, onto an array of different storage devices, and multiple. Now, these devices should only be used for this specific purpose, for storing data, making multiple copies of your files, and then retrieving that data if you need to. Otherwise, you should not be working off those drives. You should not be using those drives to transport data anywhere. They should be kept in a safe location and only accessed when you need to make a backup or when you need to retrieve a file. If you need to transport data using an external drive, have a separate drive just for transporting data or connecting to other people's computers. This minimizes the risk of malware spreading, and it also will potentially help to extend the life of the drives. Having multiple copies is done in such a way so as to create redundancy. Redundancy means that the multiple copies are set so that if one of those copies becomes inaccessible or corrupt, it doesn't immediately affect all of the other copies. In other words, the different devices on which the data are stored are autonomous. So at least once a day, this is an example of a method that you could use. It's a 4-stage method. Stage 1 is to copy the files from whatever your working platform is to an external drive, and we shall call this drive 1. And drive 1 should stay on your premises in a safe location, be that your home or office. Then copy those files again to another external drive, and we'll call that drive 2, and drive 2 should also stay on your premises. Then we make an additional copy of the files to a drive that we shall call drive 3, and drive 3 should be kept in a location that is separate from your premises in some way, in a secure location. So this protects against the loss of files should drives 1 and 2 be either stolen or destroyed. Stage 4 is to copy your files to another drive or location that can be taken in a separate location as soon as possible. We shall call this drive 4. Now drive 4 can be a physical drive which you have access to, or you can use cloud storage. Now, notice how I mentioned not only multiple storage copies, but multiple locations, so that if something happens at a particular location, for example, a fire or flood, copies at other locations are protected. Now, once you've copied the files, make sure you open them to ensure that they have copied correctly. Once you've done that, any files on your computer to which you don't need regular access, for example, if they're just for archival purposes, should be deleted from the internal drive. If too many files are stored on your computer's internal drive, you will potentially be slowing the operation of your computer. So have a system by which your files are stored externally and that you can retrieve them when you need to, but that you're not placing too much pressure on your computer. Now, this is just one example that I've seen proposed. There are a number of different examples, and the more copies you can make of your data, the better, as long as they're stored securely and as long as they are autonomous. That is to say, if one is affected, others won't be inherently affected if a disaster were to occur. Something to keep in mind about cloud storage, people tend to see it as magical, but cloud storage should not be treated as any safer or more secure than any storage media which you physically have access to. Even though cloud storage providers may have additional backups in place and they may have a greater level of security than that to which you have access, to prevent yourself from becoming complacent, always assume that it is just another drive. And also remember that cloud storage can be hacked. Nothing is hack-proof. So always ensure that, especially if you have a particular professional obligation to protect the security of data, that you are using a cloud storage, if you choose to use cloud storage, that is compliant with your legal and ethical obligations. Because in reality, no external server is completely secure. People can access it either physically or remotely. What we need to understand also about most types of storage, which are the types of storage which we tend to use, including hard disk drives and solid state drives, is that they do work on magnetism. Now, the problem with magnetic storage media is that they are very much susceptible to data corruption and infection by malware such as viruses. What that means is that the data is stored in such a way that even if the drive itself does not fail in its entirety, individual files can still become corrupted, because while I'm no physicist, it's my understanding that due to the nature of magnetism, as time passes, the magnetic quality of the medium actually changes in a way that can affect the data. Now, for this reason, it's important that the most important files, which must be permanently stored in the long term, are also stored on what is known in the industry as archival optical media. And archival optical media are laser discs, for example, CDs or DVDs. However, they're specific types of optical media that are designed to stay stable for long periods of time so that the data are most likely to be accessible permanently. Now, again, you should never rely on this. You should still have multiple copies in terms of you should have multiple drives, you should have multiple archival copies, and there's never any guarantee, but this, from what I've told, provides you with a significant level of protection against loss of data from corruption. Only certain types of optical discs are archival grade, that is to say they're designed to keep the data intact over time. I would advise you to speak to a security expert or an IT professional when choosing them. What's also beneficial about archival optical media is that whether you write data to its full capacity or whether you partially fill the disk when you burn the data to it, it can only have data written to it once. And that makes it extremely difficult to modify it, and it also makes it more difficult for malware to infect it. So viruses and other malware can very easily spread throughout a hard drive. It's more difficult for them to do so on proper archival media that can only be written to once. Now, what's also important to understand about data corruption is that if you use a service to automatically synchronize a file to an external storage location such as a drive or a cloud server, if a file becomes corrupt, it's possible that the synchronization program will register the file as changed and will copy the corrupted file to the location and potentially overwrite the intact copy. Just keep that in mind as a case in point to understand why you need to make autonomous backups. That is to say, why you need to be manually copying files to external locations and then disconnecting them from the computer once you're done, so as to prevent the spread of data corruption. Now, what can also help is having a system backup. And again, because your main data storage drive should be used only for storing your files, a system backup should always be made onto a separate drive. A system backup comes in a variety of different forms, but essentially what it does is it allows you to create a copy of how your system, that is to say the operating system and the programs on your computer and all the files and everywhere they're stored and all your settings, onto an external drive. That way, if your computer was to malfunction, it would be a quick solution for you to plug the drive into another computer or into the replacement drive once your computer is repaired and restore the exact functioning of your system that was so when that system backup was made. There are a variety of different ways that you can back up a system. As I said, I would advise you consult with an expert on which is best for your needs, but system backups are incredibly useful. But never rely on them to back up your files. Always have separate file backups as well. Now, whenever you have any type of storage device connected to a computer, it's important that you don't disconnect it without first using the safe ejection process. Often this will involve clicking on an eject button somewhere in the computer's interface. It will depend on exactly what operating system you use. If you don't properly eject it first, you're significantly at risk of data corruption on the external device. It's also wise to plug external storage devices directly into your computer's connectors and not into an expansion hub, which is a device that is connected to the computer that provides more connections than what your computer actually has. The less there is between the drive and the computer, the less likely you are to experience data corruption as you're copying the data. Also, if you are using a hard disk drive, which is a drive with a spinning platter, ensure that it is kept still on a stable surface while it is connected and in use and powered on. Because if the drive is moved while it is in use, there is more likelihood that it will cause data corruption. So thank you for joining me for this episode. Now, again, I am not an expert on information technology or data protection, so please, for your needs, consult an expert source or an expert consultant for advice on how you can best protect your data. But what I hoped to achieve today is to raise people's awareness that digital data are extremely fragile and we need to protect it, because often people don't realize until it's too late. Take action now, speak to a professional, get advice on how to best protect your data while the data is still intact. If you ever have a catastrophe, you will be incredibly thankful for it. So until next time, take care.